Welcome to Mystic and the Nerd. We are back discussing the idea, the concept, the theology, the work in progress of the word calling.
Good intro.
This is a phrase that I've been rolling around in my head for a while, and then last Sunday in our gathering, Amy decided to talk about it, and I'm thinking, yes, this is definitely a conversation for us to be talking about today. And so, what I did was send Jessie Romans chapter 1 and invited her to look at the concept that Paul was called by God to be an apostle. And I said, can you help me understand the language of this particular one? Because I've found that this concept of calling has been used on repeat inside of churches, probably outside of churches, and it connects to something or other that has some level of expectation on it. And here Paul puts the word apostle on it, which seems to be like a top of the tree moment. And since that point in time, apostle in many churches is the top of the tree conversation of their calling.
Mhm.
But before we get there, Jesse, how you doing?
I'm doing really good because we've been kind of talking about this conversation already and where it's going to go. So I'm excited. I'm excited that this is something that's been on your heart, and I'm excited to see where you're going to take it today.
Well, tell everyone what you've been painting first. Everyone's
Oh,
always eager to hear what you've been up to in the artistic world.
okay. Well, I've got so many paintings surrounding me, you can't see them at all, but I'm starting to feel really crowded in here. So this is where I've been bringing them to dry, and but I have this one right here. And I shared last time I'm doing this series on the miracles of Jesus, and I am still getting messages from people about different miracles they want to see. So I'm just doing a lot. Right now, Jesus calming the storm is in
Hmm.
progress.
Yep, and I have seen the preliminary, and it looks, well, I actually said to Jess yesterday, second only to the one she's drawn for me of the eagle.
It's pretty good.
It's so good.
I'll take it. That's encouraging. All right, are
Well,
you
what's your
ready
thoughts,
for me?
Jess? Where do you want to start with?
Yes. Well, first, I mean, we can go into just like how you said what the word calling means in the Greek concept, but I'd love for you to share a little bit more of why this struck a chord with you. Why was this on your heart?
Well, there's lots of reasons why, because it's one of those things I've always been curious about inside of Scripture. When you see words like of calling, what's your calling in life, is what we can put that on outside of the church as well. So it's the same similar sort of language, but it's often strongly connected with purpose, and so our calling to do something. So I often have people say to me, I feel called to ministry. I feel called to the mission field. Feel called to go to college. I feel called to do this, that, and the other. And what I want to ask them, and what I do ask them, is how did that happen? Help me understand the conversation you had with God, where you got to the point of going, I'm called to do this. And I want that to be a genuine conversation, not just I felt or had a good idea about doing it, or somebody said to me that I should. To me, a calling, if you're wanting to put it on a purpose scale of life, there's got to be a conversation with God in there somewhere at some point. And I want to be a part of that conversation. I want to hear how people hear the voice of God. I want to discover how they've come to those conclusions. And if those answers are very traditional in some of their language, like the church has said that I can do this, or the church has given me permission to do this, I want to sit with them and go, let's just get a little curious around that as well. And again, not to disrespect it, not to criticize it in any way, shape, or form, but I want to be curious with people around this concept of the calling. And what I've found with people, particularly people going into ministry, they'll say they feel called to ministry, but the back to that,
Mhm.
well, I wonder how much of a conversation with God's actually been had in that place, and whether people have just identified and they've done a spiritual gift test maybe and decided, yep, pastor is what I need to be doing, and things like that. These are things that were common for me 20 years ago, 25 years ago inside of churches. And so if a person did a spiritual gift test and pastor was what you got at the end of that, well, that must be my calling. Well, instead of saying it must be, how about we get curious about what it is? And so yeah, so there's a bigger thought inside of this for me around the idea of connecting with God, hearing from God, and then in that relational place, we then move in to these areas that we think that we are called
Hmm.
into.
Hmm.
Does that make sense, Jess?
100%. Yes. But I'm just thinking about so so many of us throughout our lives. How hard is it sometimes to know if we have a call or if we don't have those voices even making the suggestions of places to be called to? I think I was sharing with you before we jumped in. I think there's such a identity crisis sometimes and people feeling stuck, not really knowing their calling, or maybe they feel a little bit like they could do this or maybe this, but nothing's pulling them in any direction. So I think honestly people are really seeking that, but maybe don't know how to connect in with God. Maybe they don't know how to hear God's call on their life clearly. So I can see with the kind of the wrestle there in many different ways. And the
Yeah.
church is kind of trying to step into that place for some direction. That's a lot, largely what the church is there for, and mentorship and discipleship to help kind of steer you in that place. But like you said, we don't want to misdirect or mislead just based
Mm,
on statistics or something. Yeah.
agreed. I think my tradition too. So I got to put some of those biases on the table where I've come from with this sort of conversation, because for some people they go, I have no idea what you're talking about. But coming from a Baptist perspective, where the congregation very much is supposedly in control of the church, doesn't always work that way. It's often the people who lead the church, but Baptists hold on to this concept that the people lead the church. And so you look for God's voice in the people, which I think is a really good thing to do. I think that's a great aspect of listening for the voice of God. But if that replaces me listening for the voice of God, then I think we're in, I think I'm on thin ice in that sort of place. But I wasn't raised to hear the voice of God. I was raised to believe the word of God, which I have a high value on that. But to hear the voice of God, that's not something I've done until the last probably 25 years of my life, where it's like, okay, let's just think around this concept of God speaking to Matt. And how does that actually occur? How does that actually happen? And I think the older I've gotten, just the more ways I've found that God communicates to me. And it's just rich and it's beautiful. And I think this concept of identity, like you say, and I think this is a really critical part of this whole conversation of understanding who you are. If you don't know who you are, the chances are you'll be led by other people's voices for your call, which I felt happened to me, rather than you going, God, can you help me understand this? And then bringing what you feel, what you think God is saying to you into a broader community.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think that's a huge part of that identity piece. And I know for myself, even if you know yourself a call, if there is a call moment or a call to something that you've never done before or that feels really impossible, or I don't know if that's something I can do. I don't know if I can go back to school. I don't know if I can switch a career. I don't know. So often that call puts us in a really vulnerable position of going, I don't know. So we tend to go to people that know us well and seek their wisdom. Do you think this is for me? And yeah, I think you're right. There's always a danger there of people maybe not seeing that that's a good time for you. Maybe when I went to seminary, you have four little kids. I don't know if this is a good time for you. Maybe that's not the best decision for your family, and you put that pressure on. So I think it just discernment to come back to how do we listen to the call? How do we
Hmm.
stay truest to ourselves and what we believe when we're that vulnerable and we're really trying to discern that? What do you think?
Yeah. And again, just knowing your story too, Jess, just because courage is something you do. And I know sometimes you do it kicking and screaming and all of that kind of stuff. but courage is something you do, particularly when you feel God is on something. And I've watched you do that now for years. It's not something that I've just seen, it's something that I've watched and witnessed. And so when I listen to your call into seminary to go to study um, for young kids, single income family, mortgage, all of that sort of stuff, there's enough in the chaos there to go, no, let's just not do that right now. I think that's a great idea once the kids are all left home. But right now, there's enough in the chaos to go, no. And so I think that's part of sitting with people, though, and listening to their identity, their story, and pointing out the courage that they carry as well. And so it becomes then places of people listening to story to help you understand. See, for me, what happened when I was called into ministry, it came from a time of, um, yeah, my father wasn't in great health, and he cried out and said, "Would I?" And I'm going, "Yeah, I will," because I would. I'm just that kind of guy. And what I found in bringing that into community is that a community wants what it wants as well. And so it then fights with the voices there, and all of a sudden, more chaos came for me in that place. That place that you've had where you can sit there and go, okay, I've got all this happening, but I'm still going to say yes to it. Like, that's why I want to credit you, Jess, and Trev, because it's not just you going to seminary, it's 100% Trev going, I'm up for the ride as well. And so your courage, Trev's courage, shows the family that you guys are actually raising, which is, I think, amazing. And it's helping your kids discover their identity early, and they can see who they are. And so this idea of calling for them, I think, will probably be a way more natural event than being woken up in the middle of the night with the word seminary being spoken over you, or your father saying to me, can you come into ministry? And me going, that's a great idea. Let's just do that. Um, so there's all kinds of things for me that's why this is such a very precious conversation to be having with people when we talk about this, because you get to listen to the story of what's happening around a person, to see through the story into the person. Who is this person? And so I think I guess it's always unique too, Jess, like
Yeah.
what one person's calling is to what another person's is and how they get that. I just think that's two different unique and beautiful conversations as well. I have
Well,
no idea if that answered your question.
no, that's fantastic. I love it. But let's look at, why did this scripture speak to you then around this idea of calling and invitation?
Yeah. Well, part of it years ago, and I've actually I got my Bible here in front of me, where I actually pulled it apart. I had a look at the Greek at the time to go, is this the way the word is spoken? Like, what does calling actually mean in the Greek? And the first word that I saw in the Bible dictionary I was looking at said invitation. And I thought, wow, that's a far greater word for me. Why? Because I think God is relational. He's not telling me what to do. He's inviting me into a collaboration with him. And that to me, Jess, I know we've spoken about collaboration before, and I want everything of my life to be a collaboration with God, with others, with Trish, with you, with whoever. I love collaborating. I absolutely love it. It used to be that I was the only voice in the room. I hate that. I want to be the collaborative. And so this word invitation was like God saying to me, hey, Matt, how about we do this? And giving me the right to go, no, no, I don't want to do that. Like when I started Greater Things, when Trish and I started Greater Things, you were there, Jess, you know. Um, but I remember sitting with Francis just one on one. This is long before Greater Things was even a thing. And I said to Francis, um, I want to follow what we're doing here with God, with the online stuff. And she said, are you sure? And then she said, this is going to be really hard, Matt. And I'm there going, this is what I'm doing is really hard. Um, if I'm doing this, if I want to do what I'm doing with people who want to do it, I wonder whether that will be helpful for me when it gets hard, and it most definitely has been. And so the call out of Haberfield, if I can use that language, was more of me seeing what God's doing through what I'm doing. And I'm like, okay, I can walk with people.
Mm.
I can empower people's voices. I want people to be seen. I want kids to be seen. I want kids to be known. I want people who have been shut down in churches their whole life to be activated with their voice and to share. And I had that when we were doing the online stuff with the church I was running at the time. And I was seeing and watching that, and my heart was coming alive with it. It was creative. It was something new. I always liked that sort of doing the new things, that the ideas that come to me that often happen. And yeah, so I really felt it. And then I floated that with the people around me, like with Francis, obviously with Trish, to go, what are we going to do? And Trish is like, I'm already out the door. Like I'm already gone. Like whatever that is, that's I'm there. And then beautiful people like yourself and Trev go, yeah, I'm actually up for that. I'd actually like to have a greater conversation around that. And so this calling came from me discovering who I am.
Mhm.
I love to collaborate. I love listening to stories. It actually gives me life listening to other people's stories. Some people hate it. I absolutely love it because it shows me the person that's sitting there in front of me, regardless of their age. And just, I guess you've seen me do that, even in your own home when your kids are sitting with me. Or it doesn't matter who's sitting with me. That's the thing that I want to be invited into. And when I'm invited into family, when I'm invited into friendship, when I'm invited into relationship with people, this is to me an idea, a greater idea of the concept of calling than probably I've ever put words around. It simplified it for me. It took away some of the religious language for me because, again, growing up in a church, often these words have highly religious significance. And it put it into the place of God invited Paul to be an apostle, which uh, correct me if I'm wrong, but the word apostle simply means messenger. Um,
Mm.
and like, it's a pretty powerful messenger. Uh, but aren't we all?
Mhm.
Yeah. What do you think?
Oh, I'm trying to think. I know angelos, like the word for angel means messenger. Is that the same as apostle?
I thought it was.
I didn't break it down. I better go look, but you know what? Fact check that. Feel free to fact check anyone listening. No, you're probably right. Um, hmm. Well, I think that idea, I guess, of calling, it's like you said, it's just so interwoven with our identity and
Hmm.
who we are, and learning to trust ourselves, learning how to follow that thing that we feel called to do in this world. I think it just looks different for everyone. Like you said, it's such a personal journey. But for me, it's the essence of the idea of walk with me.
Hmm.
I was telling you about this book that I've been raving about, and I want to do a whole conversation on this book one day. But it's called The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life. But there's one line in there that he says, just kind of in that daily pursuit of who we are and helping people find their identity, their call, uh, that thing. He said, I don't, what is it? The phrase is, I don't know where I'm going, but I know how to get there. So it's kind of breaking down even that idea that you need to know what the call is, exactly what the call is going to look like, so we can kind of engineer our lives around it and kind of figure it all out. But really it comes down to just this daily walk that we do, that every day, like you just shared in your journey, was a daily walk of is kind of breaking it down into steps. Can I do this? I don't know. I need some courage to do it, but I think it's where I feel led. I feel really good about this, even if that's all. We just have a sense of there's some goodness there. Well,
Hmm.
goodness is attached to something of godness, I always say, but there's this idea of sometimes it's just that daily walk, and maybe we want that bigger, more tangible idea of what that call is. And that's probably what we're seeking when we go to other voices. We want people to really help us, give us that big picture, but a lot of the time it's concealed because it's so much in the journey.
Yeah. It is, well, to me, it is the day to day. See, I think when my world collapsed, God realigned my identity right there and then. So this is 18 years, 17 or 18 years ago now. But hope became a very big word for me, a very big word. And I found people were coming to me for hope.
Mm.
So a lot of hopeless people looking for hope. And it got to the point where I thought, if I can just provide hope for one person today, I feel like I'm doing what I've been designed to do. Now, that's grown over years, where words like compassion or empathy, love, um, and this to me, there is no greater call than to love others as Christ has loved me. And I think every believer on the planet should have that word engraved in upon their heart, right? Love others as I have loved you. If you can find a greater call than that, then I think you've been religious. Like the way that you love other people might look apostolic, it may look prophetic, may look pastoring, may look teaching. Who knows what it looks like? But that for me has been the great realignment, the leveling, the ground zero of my life. Because at the heart of it, I want to be loved and I want to love people. And that's kind of messy. There's no grand plan for that. You don't go to college to learn how to love people well. You often go to college to learn how to teach people what you believe.
Mhm.
Um, and this, I think, is to me the great realignment of the kingdom for Matt. So when people say I'm called, and if loving people well as Christ has loved them is not in the conversation, it's what I often look for, even in churches I visit. They have vision statements, they have mission statements, they have all kinds of things. And if loving people well is not in that, I'm just curious around that to go, I wonder why you landed there and not where Jesus told us to start. Um, and that, and I don't mean that as a correction to anyone, because that was the massive correction to me. That was to me to go, is it that simple? Is it really that simple? I've been taught it's really complicated. I've been taught that, am I qualified for this? And all of that sort of stuff. But
Mhm.
a child can love you as Christ has loved them and often does. It's why we've got a whole bunch to learn from the kids
Mhm.
about calling.
So true. Well, I was looking at or thinking about different ways and places in the Bible where we're called, or just the
Mm,
overall sense in the Greek and Hebrew. But in the Greek, the word to call can mean to invite, summoning, naming. Um, it was interesting to see how many times it's used in the New Testament, but the majority of the times, the idea or concept of calling is around naming, to name. So in Matthew 1, even when God is speaking, it's she'll have a son and he is to be called Jesus. There's just
mm,
this sense of calling, but attached to what we're called, right? The name. And I thought it brought me back to what you always say about our name being our story, because a name recalls, it calls up our story, who we
mm,
are, who is Jessie, like you would say. And
mm,
I just love that idea of it, the sense of calling being so much more attached to who you are, your name, your story. And in that way, I'm like, started thinking about the names that I carry. I carry the name of my father, the name of my mother, and there's a bigger story there. And my story is God's daughter. I carry
mm,
a bigger kingdom story in my name. But then I was going to the Hebrew idea of call. And I loved in the Old Testament the idea of when God comes to Moses, he calls him from the burning bush. But the
mm,
first thing it says God called him as he came over towards the bush, and he said, Moses, Moses. The first part of the calling of Moses was God just saying his name over
mm,
and over. And then the next thing God does is give his name, what he is to be called. And it's this sense of this incredible picture of I am who I am, or I will be
mm,
that I will be. And, I think it's interesting to me that God says, this is what I am to be called for generation after generation after generation to my people. And when I
Mm,
looked at the word, when it's in the translation I was reading, God says, this is what I will be called. So I thought I'd look at the Hebrew word for call there. And it was actually the word for memorial. Like
mm,
it's taking the memory of God forward, backward, and generationally speaking that. So anyway, there's a lot for me in just the idea of calling, but really how it kind of attaches to our
mm,
identity through our name and who we are, who God's called us. And that
mm,
part of being seen, I think we haven't even talked about that really, but in your calling, I think it's a big part of that identity piece is where you feel seen, how others help you feel seen to really pull out who you are.
mm. Yeah. God did the same with Samuel, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Well, even Jesus, when he was baptized in the Mount of Transfiguration, this is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. I love these thoughts that you got, Jess, because again, simply the calling means there's a voice involved,
Mm-hmm.
and that voice is calling by name. So it's not as if I'm calling a whole bunch of people and hope a few of them put their hands up.
Right.
Um, calling by name. Like I think about Isaiah, God called and who will go for me? And Isaiah's like, pick me, pick me. And then
Mm-hmm.
he tells him what he's going to do. And it's like, don't pick me, don't pick me. But just joking. But it's the voice is involved in that. The relationship is involved in that. The burning bush moment. Had Moses ever heard God before? I don't know. Who knows? But the idea is his name was uttered and he was drawn to, and he had a conversation with the angel or God himself standing inside of that burning bush. Um, it's again, often we wait for the church to tell us these things rather than for God. And that's where I think for us to slow down a little and get curious around, okay, God, what are you up to? What are you saying about this? It just helps us understand. And see, part of my thought around that too, Jess, and I love the idea of the tracker that you spoke about. It's if you know where you've been, you'll understand something of where you are. A lot of things have brought me to this place right now, even to be sitting here talking with you. Um, 10 years ago, there is no way in the world I would have thought that I'd be sitting here like this, talking with you. So, a lot of parts of my story have happened for this moment to be created. So, where are we going is a thought that I then track with that as to, okay, God, what have you been doing? And the idea of hope and people being drawn to me by hope or love or compassion. That's what I look for in the days that are ahead. It's just simply because I don't have to strive for that. I just have to be available in those sorts of moments for that as well. And I think what I've found, Jess, is when I'm operating from that place of presence, life is actually coming to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't need to burn myself out trying to do something for God that everyone else thinks is brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like how you use that word striving because I think so often it becomes something we're striving for.
Mm,
But hope almost extinguishes the idea of striving. There's just something of I think it's that pursuit of that good thing, that thing that lights you up, that thing that just calls you. I was kind of looking up the difference today around the sense of a call versus an invitation. And this is just at a very surface, broad
mm.
level. So you won't agree with it, maybe, and that's okay. It was just the thoughts that something that is a calling is internal. It is deeply internal inside of you, feeling it, internally. Whereas an invitation was something a little more externally. It's usually for something more, a place, a time, and I just thought in that sense, would you agree with that idea of the call being in an internal place, but invitation can be something maybe a little more external?
Yeah, like I have no problem with you believing that.
That was very nice of you to say that. Because your argument is the invitation is that relational
Yeah.
component. Yeah.
Well, I think, yeah, but I can understand what you're saying very clearly. And the only hesitation I would have in it is because of the religiosity that's been associated with that word for me.
Hmm.
And so, and anyone listening can go, it might mean nothing like that for you, and that's absolutely okay. And maybe there's another word there instead of invitation that people like as
Hmm.
well. Um, but I think, see, invitation, I can understand that very much as a verbal thing and an outward thing.
Hmm.
But you know, when you're with somebody and you can feel that they want to share their story with you, or that you can feel that there's something that they want to talk about. To me, that's an inner knowing of or an invitation to go, do you want to talk about that a little bit more? And
Hmm.
before you know it, um, it's all coming out. So yeah, yeah, for me, like I would probably still use the word invitation or invite,
Hmm.
but I get what you're saying, and I love that it doesn't have the religious connotations on it that I have.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, because the word invitation for me feels a little more separate and aloof, like so open and free, like
Mm-hmm.
like it's in my hands, like I said, just in my own kind of time distinguishing this in my calm moment, it felt more like a very confrontational, very clear, very scary, very deep, but a deep knowing and understanding. Whereas if it was just feels like an invitation, it's like kind of slid on the table, like, I don't know, it's up to you. Which it is. I think obviously
Yeah.
you have to have your yes. Uh, I was standing in those moments thinking, in these big moments where God spoke and called a name, it's almost like when God is that close in proximity to you, the question is off the table of if. It's like that hineni, it's that here I am, I'll go,
Mm.
send me concept of how much of God's presence just automatically gets us to want to give our
Mm.
yes. And it's not a wrestle or struggle or feeling like a loss of self or control. It's, I don't know, even if
Yeah.
it's scary, terrifying.
Well, Moses thought it was.
Right.
Jonah thought it was. Like, there's plenty of examples in the Bible where God asks somebody to do something, and they're like, no. And I wonder how many people we don't hear about in the Bible because they said no and said, no, I'm not up for that. And you got people like Moses, and I love Moses because all of his insecurities are out there, and I feel so comfortable with that guy. Just going, that dude's got insecurities. I feel at home, and you listen to them flow from him, right? And
Mhm.
Jonah's like, stuff that. I'm not going to Nineveh. I'm going to Tarshish, and we're going to hang out there for a while, even though I can clearly hear what you're saying, God, and I'm clearly saying no. There's a bit of a challenge in the concept of free will in Jonah's story there. Would you agree with that?
100%. And
He did jump off the boat.
that's so good. But I was kind of being cheeky when you sent me that Romans 1 as far as the word invitation. When I think of Paul's story, and I did learn today that I think he refers to his call, being called by God 29 times in the New Testament because like he was blinded. So
Hmm.
I'm thinking like how invitational did that feel for Paul to
Yeah.
have such a powerful moment where God called him, called him out on everything that he
Hmm.
was doing, killing people. Um, anyway, in his name. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, see, I think just even with that, this concept for me, like even with Paul, I think he was destroying his identity by doing the things he was doing, and you know how Paul later talks about people shipwrecking their conscience. I reckon Paul was there.
Hmm.
I reckon he's doing things that he knew internally. This is not how the whole thing of life works. It's not bringing me life. It's actually bringing something else. And so I think those moments of going into that place of um, uh, the call, like I'd love to sit with him and just talk with him about the backstory, okay? Because
Mhm.
for me, like even with Moses, you don't know what happened really from a one-to-one, okay, Moses, how you going today sort of moment. These things bring life when you start doing and being the person that God has called you to be, right?
Mhm.
And I wonder what sort of life Paul got, which he would testify later, right? Like he said, I'm the Pharisee of all Pharisees. I'm from the tribe of Benjamin. I'm all this sort of stuff, but all of that is rubbish compared to what I found. And Moses is like, when God says, I'm actually going to get rid of them all, Moses, I'm going to start again with you. And Moses is like, I'm not going anywhere unless you go with me, bro. Not going anywhere. So he had and he knew what it was to be in relationship and connection with God, hearing God and stepping in. And that's where I think there's more to the backstory in all of those
Mhm.
brilliant humans that we can joke around. Paul being blinded, the people going, what the heck just happened there?
But look how much he boasts of that moment. Look how much it encouraged him and gave him the courage to do what he ended up doing. I mean, he was probably one of the most misunderstood people of his time because of who
Hmm.
he was as
Yeah,
Saul and then who he became as Paul, I think.
100%.
Yeah. One last fun fact,
Hmm.
if you can handle it. When I was looking for the word call in the Old Testament, did you know the Levitical book, Leviticus?
Hmm.
The Hebrew name for the book is uh, it comes from the word kara, which is to call, but so it's and it starts with a vav. Anyway, I can't pronounce it, but it means and he called. That's the name of the book.
Hmm.
And he
Wow.
called because it's the first line when you read, and God calls Moses from the tent of meeting.
Hmm. I love that.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah, I've learned something new today. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. I couldn't tie it into anything that we were talking about, but I didn't want to leave that one unsaid. I think that's neat.
Well, it is very nerdy to bring Leviticus
Leviticus.
into any conversation, right?
And he called, you mean? It's a great title for a book.
Yep. Walk with Me is a pretty good title.
That's a good one. That's a good
Hmm.
one. Excellent.
Well, this is Mystic and the Nerd. If you guys have got different thoughts or different ideas around calling, we'd love to hear them. Again, Jess and I, we're just going a bit back and forward around our own thoughts, some of our own traumas for the words, and just the way that we see these words working out in today, and even occasionally bringing Leviticus into the conversation. Um, can't go wrong, can you, Jess?
Never.
For everyone listening and watching along, thank you for hanging out with us, and we'll be back next time with another question to be answered. Bye for now.